friends. Thanks so much.
Thank you. John, thank you.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Stick around. Marketplace is next. On the show tonight, for just about everyone, the cost of insurance is going up. One reason why insurers are having to play catch-up.
As healthcare costs go up to see a doctor, to get prescription drugs, that drives the health insurance premiums.
A look at what is behind higher insurance costs across industries. That's coming up next on Marketplace. We'll be back with all things considered for you at 7 o'clock. 33 degrees right now. We'll see temperatures in the mid-20s tonight. It's WNYC just before 6:30.
WNYC is supported by Netflix presenting Daughters. The documentary follows 4 young girls as they prepare for a momentous daddy-daughter dance with their incarcerated fathers. Daughters, awards eligible.
WNYC, independent journalism in the public interest. 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire awe and wonder. Learn more at templeton.org.
Not all economic indicators are created equal, that we know, but they all do tell us something. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance, helping protect small businesses and the owners that run them. Whether a plumber, accounting business, or restaurant, Progressive can help with over 30 customizable coverages. Online quotes available in as little as 6 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. And by Revenued, providing working capital for businesses whose cash flow is holding them back. Revenued approves businesses based on revenue, not credit, and funds can be approved and available in just 1 day. Visit getrevenued.com. And by Total Wine and More, helping shoppers find gifts for everyone on their holiday list, including a single barrel bourbon for Dad. Curbside pickup and delivery offered in most areas. TotalWine.com. Drink responsibly. Be 21.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Risnall. It is Thursday today. This one is the 12th of December. Good as always to have you along, everybody. As surely as day follows night, with the Consumer Price Index comes in close proximity the Producer Price Index. CPI yesterday, PPI today. The first, prices at the retail level. The latter, prices at wholesale. The Bureau of Labor Statistics told us this morning that the PPI was up 0.4% in November from a month earlier. That is more than people had been guessing. Year on year, wholesale inflation is at 3%. Without casting too many aspersions here, it is fair to say that PPI is the less popular sibling of the CPI. But as Marketplace's Sabri Benishul reports, that does not mean it's not important.
You go to the grocery store, you pick up the eggs, you see the price of the eggs up almost 40% year over year.
Okay.
And you put the eggs right back down.
Not today, Satan. Not today.
That is how we see inflation, and that is what the Consumer Price Index measures. But what we see is not the whole picture. Businesses see a whole other world of inflation. They see prices we don't.
If we think about manufacturing, it could be things like inputs like copper or the chips that go into the computers.
Scott Helfstein is head of investment strategy for Global X ETFs.
If we think about restaurants, that could be something like the staff and their employment costs.
Now, why might we care about a price that we can't see? Because it rolls downhill.
Well, with price increases for producers, they're going to pass them on to consumers in the months to come.
Kurt Rankin is a senior economist with PNC Financial Services Group.
Think of oil prices. When oil prices rise, we see that immediately at the gas pump. But we might not see that immediately for plastics that might be manufactured from that oil. And then eventually the retailers that have to pay more to stock those items pass those price increases then on to the people buying them.
So the Producer Price Index captures all of this, and that is why we care. It's kind of like a ghost of Christmas yet to come situation. Today's PPI number was complicated. Overall, prices from a business perspective were up 0.4% in November. Bob Murphy is a professor of economics at Boston College.
The services component actually dropped slightly, but the goods component moved up.
Services, barbershops, healthcare, restaurants, prices in that world have been the hardest to control. So the fact that inflation is slowing down there is good news. The fact that goods inflation perked up isn't necessarily something to worry about yet, mostly because goods inflation has been low to non-existent for the past year. So what does all of this mean?
This provides a little more legs to inflation for a month or two or three, but is not something that's going to be sustained.
So he says inflation probably will fall further, but it might take a while. In New York, I'm Sabri Ben-Achour for Marketplace.
On the topic of inflation and, by extension, interest rates, this item, the European Central Bank cut its benchmark interest rate today. Inflation is down quite a bit over there, 2.3% there, 2.7% here. Our economy, though, is still way stronger. Also, and for your calendar, the Fed meets next Tuesday, Wednesday. The phrase I want you to keep in mind here is hawkish cut. We will explain in the weekly wrap tomorrow. Wall Street today, not a winner. Details, numbers, y'all know the drill. Here's another installment of our semi-regular series, You Can't Fight Market Forces. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau finalized a rule today that will require banks and credit unions with more than $10 billion in assets to cap their overdraft fees to, with some exceptions, $5. The CFPB says that'll save households billions of dollars a year. Thing is, the banking sector has been moving away from charging those fees for a good couple of years now. Bank of America trimmed its fee back in 2022. Capital One and Citibank have eliminated them entirely. Why? Here's Marketplace's Justin Ho.
Even though we've seen a wave of big banks voluntarily ratchet back their overdraft fees,
it was not entirely driven out of altruism.
Julie Hill is dean at the University of Wyoming College of Law. She says the CFPB has made it clear for years that it would be scrutinizing overdraft fees, so banks decided to just bite the bullet and act early. Hill says it also helped that interest rates had been rising, so banks' loans were pulling in more revenue. In situations like that,
banks don't really care that much whether they get income from fees or income from interest.
Meanwhile, many people have been sitting on extra cash ever since the pandemic, says Chris Duncan, chief lending officer at LaSalle State Bank in Illinois.
We really saw coming out of COVID a pretty significant decline in the overdraft activity in some of our customers.
Duncan's bank is too small to be covered by the new overdraft rule, but it recently put a daily limit on overdraft fees, and it won't charge any fee if a customer overdraws less than $10.
We kind of always look at the regulations that are passed and kind of assume that eventually those regulations will trickle down to banks our size.
That said, banks don't want to do away with overdraft fees either. Robert James II is CEO of Carver Financial Corporation, a company with 2 community banks in Georgia and Alabama. He says when a customer overdraws their account, the bank is essentially lending them money to cover, say, an electric bill.
That's a service to you, that's a service to the electric company, and ultimately we've got to, be able to earn something for being able to provide that service.
James says at his banks, customers have to opt into overdraft services, and many do.
In order to make sure that they can essentially pay a certain bill or meet an obligation before they have access to their regular income.
And since many of his customers operate on limited incomes, James says he's hoping to provide overdraft services for as long as he can. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
As I believe I've said a time or two on this program, the Census Bureau is an underappreciated source of really insightful data about this economy. Durable goods orders, housing starts and sales, the trade gap. Also, and perhaps even less appreciated, what the Bureau calls geographic mobility and migration. They've been keeping track of where Americans are moving since 1948. And last year, it turns out, was the least mobile year we've had since that first survey almost 80 years ago. Less than 10% of people in this economy moved in 2023. Marketplace's Samantha Fields has more on that.
It used to be much more common for people to move than it is today. In the 1950s and 60s, about 20% of Americans moved in a given year. But now?
We are pretty much a non-mobile society.
William Fry, a demographer at the Brookings Institution, says there are some big trends that have contributed to this long, slow decline in mobility since the 50s and 60s.
Back then, there were many more renters, and renters tend to move more than owners do. And it was a younger population.
And younger people tend to move more than older people do. So today,
fewer young people, fewer people moving.
Charlie Doherty, senior economist at Wells Fargo, says there's also been a steady increase in the number of households where both partners work.
Finding 2 new jobs is a whole lot more challenging than just finding one. So that's another big factor, I think, that's holding down the move rate.
More recently, economist Jed Kolko says the pandemic has also played a role.
The increase in remote work makes it easier for some people to stay put while finding a new job.
And then there's the housing market of the last few years. Housing prices have skyrocketed, interest rates have jumped, and both inventory and affordability are near all-time lows. That's for renters, too. Kolko says it can be hard to find a place to move, even if you want to.
And the big decline in mobility that we've seen just in the most recent years is a decline in shorter distance moves maybe just across town. And those are moves that tend to be more about housing than about new job opportunities.
So far, Logan Motoshami, lead analyst at Housing Wire, says this lack of mobility doesn't seem to have been much of an issue for the economy.
This will become a problem for our economy when the labor market gets softer and people start losing their jobs and they can't find anything local.
Especially if it's still so expensive and challenging to move. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
You wake up, get a cup of coffee or tea, whatever your choice is. You want to know what's going on in business and the economy first thing in the morning? Have I got a deal for you? David Brancaccio and the gang on the Marketplace Morning Report get out of bed real early every day to let you know what's going on. We heard from Sabria up at the top of the program about the Producer Price Index and how manufacturers are struggling to keep their costs low and what all that has to do with what consumers are paying. But even though inflation is off its peak, price levels, as economists like to say, are still elevated. And tariffs loom come the change in administration. So retailers are kind of betwixt and between, as you'll hear in today's installment of our series, My Economy.
My name is Eric Bauer, and I'm the owner of Turner Hat Company, which I purchased this year in March. We have 4 main styles. We have Western straws, so traditional kind of white cowboy hats. We do Western felts, so kind of same idea, but in felt. And then the other 2 segments that are big for us are, I call them like leisure and outdoor hats, but those are things like lower priced straws and palms that you'd use to cut your grass or go outside and play some golf. And then we also do a line of sporting hats for things like hunting and fishing that are more focused on just keeping the sun off your neck or keeping you a little bit warmer when you're out like on an early morning. 50% of our cost is just getting the product to us. The other big line items for us are people and then transportation. So we source our products from China and Mexico. So with ocean freight from China, we also pay about 25 to 30% tariffs on products coming from China, and that all adds to the product cost. And then on the other end of the equation, hats are fairly low value and fairly large, and so shipping them out to our individual customers takes up another big chunk of our operating costs. We had gone into, or we were going into 2025 thinking about the customer relationship, and that is now kind of a a number 1B priority to the number 1A priority, which is stabilizing our supply chain and making sure that we're still profitable on the products that we carry. And so the big thing that we're worried about are large tariffs on products from Mexico that currently have no tariffs on them, and then increased tariffs on products from China that have, like I said, 25 to 30% tariff on them right now. So we are literally day and night seeking other suppliers across the world. So we're looking at places like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam, Colombia, basically anywhere that's manufacturing hats, just on the chance that these tariffs kind of come to play. Because if they do, we would have no choice but to pass those costs on to customers if we can't negotiate lower costs from the suppliers or find another supplier in a country without the tariffs on them. So if we're getting a 25% increase on our raw product cost, then the end consumer is going to see a 25% increase in their product. And so any increase in that price that the customer pays has a really big impact on our demand. That's why we've sprung into action to try to find suppliers where we wouldn't be affected and keep our costs as low as possible, because it's really important to our customers.
Tell you what, it takes guts to be a small business person, huh? Eric Bauer, newish proprietor of the Turner Hat Company. Whether headwear is your thing or not, we want to know what your economy is like. So tell us, won't you? Marketplace.org/myeconomy. Coming up.
So it's not like a lifeboat's coming anytime soon.
Ooh, that's not good. First, though, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's off 234 today, about 0.5%, 43,914. The NASDAQ down 132, 0.7%, 19,902. S&P 500 off 32 points, about 0.5%, 6,051. Costco is due to report earnings today after the close, so let's do some big box here, shall we? Costco during the session off 0.6%. Walmart, owner of the competing Sam's Club as well, subtracted 0.9%. BJ's Wholesale Clubs, which were started by discount department store chain Zayre back in the 1980s, in case you didn't know, slumped 1.2% today. Heard earlier from Justin about banks and overdraft fees, so let's check in with some financial institutions, shall we? Bank of America out of Charlotte, North Carolina, flat. Wells Fargo slid 1.1%. JP Morgan Chase, which has a head office in New York City, but is incorporated in where? Delaware. Declined 0.8%. I was not planning on that rhyme, actually. You're listening to Marketplace.
The Numbers is supported by Odoo.com, your entire business on one platform. Marketplace is supported by Viking, dedicated to bringing travelers to the heart of each destination with small ship, river, ocean, and expedition voyages, offering cultural enrichment and immersive experiences. Discover more at Viking.com. And by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness and accelerating action on America's fiscal challenges to build a brighter economic future for the next generation. Learn more at pgpf.org.
WNYC supporters include IBM. With IBM Watson X, businesses can build a custom AI assistant that can leverage their trusted data and be trained on their workflows. It can be tuned to do just what businesses need. More information at ibm.com/productivity.
Next time in the New Yorker Radio Hour, the situation in Gaza and a discussion on the term settler colonialism.
The early Zionists understood that they were colonizing Palestine. That's not some anti-Semitic slur. That's the description they gave themselves.
Historian Rashid Khalidi next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour. Saturday mornings at 10 on 93.9 FM or on the WNYC app.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. Coming up in the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, Mayor Adams met with President-elect Trump's so-called border czar, Tom Homan, earlier today. We're going to get the details from that meeting and much more at 7 o'clock. Stay with us.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Risdall. Let's just stipulate here that nobody likes paying their insurance premiums. If everything works out all right, you don't crash your car. You don't have big medical expenses and your house doesn't have any problems. Sometimes, though, life has other plans and those checks from the claims you make come in really handy. But when your premiums go up, and up as they have been, car coverage rates are up almost 13% from a year ago. Overall inflation, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, 2.7% here. Well, when premiums go up like that, one might fairly ask, what the heck? Marketplace's Kelly Wells did.
Inflation is hitting just about every type of insurance because the stuff and people we're insuring cost more to fix.
Parts and labor for car repairs are more expensive, construction materials and labor for home repairs are more expensive, along with most other goods and services in the economy.
Stephen Shore, who teaches insurance and risk management at Georgia State University, says some may be surprised that insurance rates are still going up now that inflation is stabilizing.
That's because insurers are playing catch-up.
And insurers have to show state regulators their costs have gone up before they're allowed to raise prices. One big area where prices have increased noticeably is health insurance. Here's David Marlette, who teaches insurance at Appalachian State University.
As healthcare costs go up to see a doctor, to get prescription drugs, that drives the health insurance premiums.
As do the rising wages of healthcare providers. Another sector feeling the pinch of inflation is car insurance, says Rob Hoyt, who teaches risk management and insurance at the University of Georgia.
Part of the problem is some of the minor accidents end up escalating in cost pretty significantly.
Cars are more complex nowadays. A little fender bender isn't just a dented bumper and some scratched paint, but also a broken rear-facing camera or motion sensor.
And then there's a whole lot of work that has to go on by the technicians to reset a lot of that technology after it's been repaired.
Which means longer repair and car rental times. Oh, and more labor costs. Drivers are familiar with paying for liability insurance, but that's not restricted to cars. Say someone falls and breaks their arm on your slippery stairs. Kimberly Lilly, chair of the California Legislative Action Committee's Insurance Task Force, says in our more litigious culture, they may be less likely just to say, forget about it.
And more likely to say, I saw someone else make $200,000 off this kind of accident. I'm going to sue you and try and get that money too.
And as residents of California and Florida already know, home insurance costs are surging. Lilly says that's because of climate change.
The result of the planet warming up is that we have more severe hurricanes, we have more fires, and we're having a much larger loss than we ever used to have.
And while a slowdown in general inflation might help the insurance industry to some extent, climate change, shifting social attitudes, and fancier cars will keep pushing up premiums, Lilly says.
They're going to have to continue to charge more. That number is just going to be bigger. So plan for it.
Because unless insurance companies can raise their rates and stay profitable, they'll stop insuring altogether, a challenge that residents in fire and flood-prone states have already begun to face. I'm Kaylee Wells for Marketplace.
There are, says the aforementioned Census Bureau of the United States of America, a hair more than 76 million baby boomers living in this country right now. That is data from the 2020 census. And they will, those boomers, eventually, as will we all, pass. And when they do, economists and financial planners expect that in the aggregate, the economic power they will leave behind will be what has come to be called the Great Wealth Transfer. By one estimate, more than $100 trillion in assets is going to flow from older generation Americans to their heirs and favorite charities over the next 25 years, mostly through inheritance, but also gifts made before, well, you know. Gen X is going to be first in line, as it were, and then their children, millennials and Gen Z. What's going to be really interesting is to see what kind of difference that money might make. Here's Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman.
Gerard Bucello works as a proposal writer in the Washington, D.C. area. He's 29, so a young millennial demographically, and a pretty fortunate one at that.
I have benefited from the financial planning my parents put into my higher education.
as well as help they provided in down payment assistance for the purchase of a new home.
Most of his friends are renters and saddled with student loans. Bucello's parents are professionals in their 60s and pretty well off, but they've told him they'll be spending to live well in retirement rather than trying to hold on to their wealth to leave an inheritance when they die. But
my expectation is not actually to receive anything. That is not something I can or should plan around.
A massive wave of inheritance is something wealth managers are planning around, though, says Andy Smith at Edelman Financial Engines.
This is a huge part of my client meetings now, the largest transfer of wealth in history, and it's poised to make many new millionaires.
In a report published back in 2021, Cerulli Associates calculated that over the next 25 years, $84 trillion would be passed from older to younger generations. Analyst Chase Horton just crunched the numbers again.
We find that has increased to $124 trillion.
There are a few reasons: inflation, soaring stock and home prices, plus increasing wealth concentration among the richest and oldest Americans. Horton says half of the great wealth transfer will come from just the top 2% of households, those with $10 million or more in net worth.
And the majority of the wealth they're transferring is going to be left to the top 2% of heirs, which is obviously not a widespread equitable distribution.
Generationally, the sharp rise in family gifting and inheritance will mostly benefit Gen X early on. Millennials and Gen Z will have to wait a decade or more to really start increasing their share.
So it's not like a lifeboat's coming anytime soon.
For some, it's probably not coming at all. Financial services firm Northwestern Mutual regularly asks Americans about their inheritance plans and expectations, and advisor Jessica Majeski says they don't add up.
More people are expecting to receive an inheritance than planning to leave an inheritance.
22% of Boomer and Gen X households plan to leave money.
But yet there's 32% of millennials and 38% of Gen Zers who hope or expect to receive an inheritance.
And a majority of them consider that money critical to their financial security and retirement. Majeski isn't exactly surprised.
All the stories they hear about Social Security potentially not being there for them, I think it creates some angst and expectation that they'll need an inheritance.
But she says relying on one is bad financial planning.
It's going to be like gravy on top, right? Like we're not going to build that into the plan because anything can happen. The parent that you thought was going to leave you an inheritance could live well into their 90s.
In his planning practice, Andy Smith at Edelman Financial Engines says most younger clients have pretty prosaic ideas of how to use money from a family gift or inheritance.
When I ask, how do you think you're going to spend a $100,000 windfall? Maybe 40%, it's going to go to housing, paying bills, payments on debts or loans.
Gerard Bucello doesn't think getting a one-time windfall from his parents would be licensed to change his entire life.
Would I quit my job? Absolutely not. Move to a bigger house? Almost certainly not.
He says he might use some of it to help a friend or relative in need, or take a really long vacation. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Babbel for Business. Babbel's professional language learning platform offers practical and industry-specific language courses designed for faster, better learning and a more culturally inclusive workforce. Learn more at babbelforbusiness.com. And by JTV Jewelry Television, offering a large selection of diamonds, lab-grown diamonds, and diamond simulants and styles from formal to everyday wear. JTV can be found on your TV or at jtv.com.
This final note on the way out today. Did you ever watch that show Hot Ones, where various celebrities attempt to hold a normal conversation with the host while eating progressively hotter and hotter chicken wings? It is entertaining in a peculiar kind of way. Anyway, did you ever wonder how much this show that started as a random YouTube series and its production company might be worth? If your answer was $82.5 million, go to the head of the class. BuzzFeed, which through a long, complicated series of events owns it, announced the sale today to a consortium of investors. John Buckley, John Gordon, Noya Carr, Diantha Parker, Amanda Peacher, and Stephanie Seek are the Marketplace editing staff. And Mibra Bawe is the managing editor. And I'm Kai Ryssdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is 8 p.m.